Late this spring, just about a week after the Clothes Horse 200th episode live extravaganza, I traveled to Tempe, Arizona to join Fabric for its Eco Fashion Week. Fabric is a phygital fashion incubator, a business accelerator, a design studio, an academy, and a micro factory right in the heart of the Arizona State campus. If you're curious about all of that, the founders of Fabric will be joining me for an upcoming episode. And I have to say, what I saw them doing there was incredible. Just groundbreaking in terms of how their work, the facilities they're creating, the services they're creating, the support they're providing, really could give a lot of small, ethical, sustainable brands a leg up in a world that right now isn't giving them much of a leg up, right? It's giving them a little toe up, maybe at best. Actually, my friend Janelle, who also comes from the fast fashion industry, she has her own brand now. She's a weaver. She has nothing to do with that industry at all anymore, but she came out to join me in Tempe, and she was really blown away by what Fabric was doing as well. And I think she was really excited about what this could mean for the future of clothing. It was a really incredible trip. I was in Tempe to speak at an Eco Fashion Week event and then to moderate a panel conversation about the Eco Park Summit, which was a gathering of people throughout the textile supply chain and the textile waste chain that were working together to brainstorm a new business model focused on circularity, living wages, and domestic manufacturing. And I got to sit in on one of their sessions, and it was really, really exciting. I wish I'd been there all week to be a part of all the conversations, because I was like, yes, we need more of this. And everybody in that room who, like I said, was working on all parts of the textile chain, they were all so committed to doing this really hard work to solve this problem. It just gave me a little injection of hope that I'd been needing. You burn through a lot of hope really fast sometimes. And so that trip was just so good for me. Anyway, one of the individuals joining me for that panel conversation was Bill McWraith. And he's a man who has worked in the apparel industry for decades and decades. He was the former CSO of PVH, which is the luxury conglomerate. He was the senior vice president of sourcing at Walmart, and he was the CSO of Victoria's Secret. So a range there, right? And by the way, CSO is all about sourcing. That's what the S is for, and supply chain. So here's a guy who really knows where stuff is made, how it is made, and who is making it. And his job within his career was to make sure that the stuff was being made, as profitably and consistently as possible. Bill's retired now, and he has made a circular fashion industry his entire focus. He told the audience stories about moving apparel production to China 20 plus years ago. This stuff is fascinating to me. He talked about how everyone thought that was a wild decision that would surely never work out. It's ironic now, I know, but that was a major change for the industry. This is a person who worked within the industry as production moved into China, as fast fashion became the model. Even when he was working at PVH, making luxury goods, you can't discount the fact that the fast fashion model also impacted how that company worked, and certainly how and where the stuff was made. And I'll tell you, the whole idea of moving production to China, even early in the I'm talking the very early years of my career, we weren't making a lot of stuff in China yet, specifically clothes. We just weren't making a lot of clothes there. Accessories, sure, but only if they weren't leather. Leather stuff we did in India. China was known for not having good leather. If we were going to do fake leather, anything kind of plasticky, we would do it in China unless it was embellished, because that stuff never worked out either. And it was just a different time. We made a lot of our t-shirts here in the United States, here in Pennsylvania, believe it or not. And other apparel items came from India, especially if they were cotton or embellished. We also brought in things from Bangladesh or Vietnam, but we weren't really making clothes in China yet. moving to China was a massive change for the apparel industry, and it really helped them get the industry as a whole adopt the fast fashion business model. Honestly, I don't think that was how it started, but that's where it went. Anyway, I asked Bill something that I've pondered here on Clothes Horse more and more often these days. Okay, well, it didn't start as a question. It started as a statement followed by a question. This was literally the first thing I said to him, other than like, hey, or whatever. I said, it seems as if brands are at a crossroads. They can either compete with Shein and fail with their current infrastructure and supply chain, or they can shift into a more ethical, sustainable direction and sort of become more premium in the eyes of their customers and the consumer landscape as a whole. But instead, they're opting to try to compete with Shein. Why are the CEOs of these companies so short-sighted about the future? And he said something that at first, well, it felt pretty shocking. He said, I believe that we are at the beginning of an extinction event. And I was like, whoa, this is getting really heavy right out of the gate. This is literally the first question I've asked you. So I asked him, do you mean the extinction of humanity? And you could just feel the despair in the room. There was just this noticeable, heavy, sad collective sigh from the audience when I asked that. He laughed. He said, no, extinction of a business model. We saw that happen 15 years ago as brands adopted the fast fashion model. Those that couldn't keep up, they went out of business. Department stores, some mall brands, etc. Now, we're going to see those who shifted to the fast fashion model go out of business over the next few years because they cannot compete with Shein. And most of them will try, and they will fail. These businesses can only continue if they stop, reflect, and make a pivot in strategy and their supply chains. Now, obviously, I'm paraphrasing what he said. My brain might be a steel trap for data, but I cannot remember exact quotes. But this is essentially how the conversation went. And it really stuck with me that many of the brands we know right now will be gone in a few years, a decade at most. And you know what? It doesn't shock me because I see it when I read their quarterly earnings reports, because that's my version of self-care, okay? Reading quarterly earnings reports and, specifically for fast fashion brands and, making fake stuff in Photoshop. I love both of those. That's how I relax, okay? But I see it when I read these reports. Declining revenue, high return rates that are costing them a fortune, and no clear point of differentiation on the competitive landscape. Urban Outfitters, where I began my career, is a great example of this. Their target customer is in their teens and early 20s. Well, those customers have split into two main shopping groups. Those that shop secondhand, whether they are at a thrift store or buying from online platforms. These are the ones who are also maybe thinking of sustainability, but, they're driven by cost. Secondhand is more affordable. And then there's the other group that are also looking for low prices and a vast product offering. And they get that from Shein and Cider and Temu, AliExpress, even Amazon shopping. Urban Outfitters is a lot more expensive than Shein, right? All those other brands that I just listed. So they can't compete from pricing. And their quality is not that good either. So it's not like, oh, well, you get what you pay for. You're still getting something kind of shoddy, right? Furthermore, the Urban Outfitters product offering is so much more narrow. The brand focuses on like 2 to 3 trend concepts at a time, while Shein offers every TikTok micro trend and then some, and definitely way faster than Urban ever could. And furthermore, Urban Outfitters is notoriously not size inclusive. This is an intentional and, in my opinion, antiquated decision on the part of company leadership. And, the ultra fast fashion brands like Shein, you got to give it to them. They offer a lot more sizes. Sure, the fit might not be that great, but at least they offer something. And on top of all of that, what does Urban Outfitters stand for at this point? They are a fast fashion brand. They don't do anything really like in the realm of like I don't know, improving society, giving back, right? They don't stand for anything. You know, they refused to pay up back in 2020. They're known as like a fast fashion brand with a lot of polyester and like no real sustainability measures in place. They don't even really talk about it, right? So what do they have going for them? Well, not much. And if they continue as they are right now, and I know if it seems like I'm picking on Urban Outfitters, but really there are plenty of other brands who fall into this same bucket, right? If they continue as they are right now, which I think is just like, maybe we'll try to compete with Shein, I'm not even really sure, they are going to fail, right? Because they just can't. They can't. And we'll talk ad nauseum over this series about how Shein, as it works right now, has these advantages. I'm not saying they're good advantages when it comes to the planet or its people, but they're really good advantages for selling a lot of stuff really cheaply and profitably. They have advantages that none of these retailers, including Urban Outfitters, that none of them have. So what should Urban Outfitters do? I mean, like I said, it seems like so far they really don't know. If I were running that place, LOL, one, I would make them pay me so much money. But beyond that, I would tell them to return to their late 90s, early aughts roots. Like bring back the bestseller styles of that era, but do better. Better fabrics, better fit, extended sizes, and have a focus on sustainable and ethical values. I don't think they could get there overnight, but they'll never get there if they don't start, right? I would tell them to go back to sponsoring bands and shows. They used to do so much cool stuff at South by Southwest. I know South by Southwest is like also a sad, evil version of its former self, but like Urban was really engaged in music, right? And it made sense for the brand and it was good for the brand from a branding perspective. They need to go back to that. They need to fund art pop-ups and design incubators. They need to do events with schools and nonprofit organizations. They should put together a huge get out the vote effort for this year's election. And they should actually buy from small brands and artists, not copy them. What they need to do is become a brand that means something and is cool. They need to adapt to what it means to live in 2024. Not this stale old take on selling clothing that I feel like is like trapped in 2012. And, you know, time and trends and who we are on this world has changed so much in 12 years that you can't help but look at Urban Outfitters as this like antiquated presence, much like you might look at Macy's or Sears, you know, like what are you guys doing? Like, I feel like you don't live in the same time that I live in. Here's the thing. Any brand that is going to survive this extinction event is going to have to make some major changes. And that's because Shein has and is changing what it means to buy and sell clothing on planet Earth. And it's not a change for the better. To be clear, not a change for the better. It's a change we should all care about, no matter where we buy our clothing, because Shein and what it means for the future of making and selling just about any category of stuff will impact every one of us, no matter what we wear, where we live, the kind of job we have, or how much money we have. In fact, the SHEIN-ification, wow, that just rolls off the tongue, is such a big deal, so impactful for every one of us, that this episode is part one in a short series about Shein, where it's been, where it's going, and how it is changing everything. Welcome to Clothes Horse, the podcast that is once again talking about Shein. I'm your host, Amanda, and this is episode 204. Some people might say 204. And it's part one in a small series I'm calling the SHEIN-sodes, because, you know, I'm cheesy like that. Anyway, in this series, we will be dissecting how Shein's growth and potential IPO will change the way the industry works, and why that's bad for everyone, how Shein's business model results in low-quality product, sometimes with bonus toxic ingredients, how Shein's entire internal structure makes it easy to avoid legal ramifications for stealing and copying designs and art, injuring customers, and adhering to regulations regarding working conditions. And that's just a little bit, because there's so much more. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Shein. And I knew that there was so much that I could never cover it all in one episode. In this part of the series, once again, part 1, we will be tackling Shein's impending IPO and WTF is an IPO, how Shein grew and grew and grew, what in the heck is the de minimis loophole, and how is this benefiting Shein? And are there really empty airplanes flying back to China every day so they can be loaded back up with Shein and Temu parcels? I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like the answer on that one. Before we get started, I am once again reminding you of the Clothes Horse Jamboree. It's happening August 16th to 17th here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You can find out all about it at clotheshorsepodcast.com or in the pinned post on my Instagram profile. Tickets are $200, but they will be going up to $300 on July 1st. So buy your ticket now. And guess what? I have introduced a payment plan option. It's called Brenda Pay. Each payment is $50, spread out over 4 payments. The first one happens when you buy your ticket. You use promo code installment1 at checkout. You'll be charged $50 and you'll receive your actual ticket immediately. And then I'll send you a link for the remaining payments on $625, $725, and the week of the Jamboree. You can learn all of that by reading the show notes. And by the way, I know that none of you read the show notes because last week I hit a little Easter egg where I said the first person to email me would win a free ticket to the Jamboree. No one emailed me, so no one read the show notes. Anyway, that's where all that information is, along with like in this episode and in this Shein series, so many links to other things that you might want to read about. Anyway, if you have any questions about the Jamboree, reach out to me via email. Otherwise, get your ticket now because that payment plan will disappear on July 1st. And if you're planning to come, but you're still trying to figure out the details, drop me an email and I will honor the $200 price through July for you. But you have to email me to lock that in. Okay, next, I wanted to give you an update on the Fashion Act. Things really came down to the wire with the bill beginning to be drafted the night before the session ended. We picked up some more sponsors in that last week, including some Republicans, making the Fashion Act a bipartisan bill. That right there is a huge accomplishment. But unfortunately, there just wasn't enough time. The legislature this year took an extra 2 weeks to approve the budget, and they just kind of ran out of time to accomplish all the other legislation. But we are not giving up. We will be there again, working, lobbying, and getting it passed next year. Unfortunately, the legislature doesn't meet again until next year, like in January, but that gives the coalition of people, organizations, and companies working to pass the Fashion Act more time to rally even more people to our cause. And I will tell you the progress that we made this very first time bringing the act to the New York State Assembly. The fact that we made as much progress as we did is thanks to all of you who shared the information about it, who called and emailed, and really let all of those legislators know that this mattered to you. So thank you. You should give yourselves a round of applause. But I also am just going to tell you, I'm going to totally ask you to do all that stuff again next year when the legislature reconvenes. But we're going to get it passed. We're going to get it passed next year. I feel like it's going to happen pretty fast because we have all this time to continue to work on people. And the support we were able to get during those last few weeks of the session really make me feel like super optimistic about the future. Furthermore, other states have been reaching out to ask for the act, like so that they can take the language and create their own within their states. So this is the beginning of something. Even though it feels like, oh, is this the end? It's totally not. I'll tell you, this was kind of a weird few weeks to receive that, well, disappointing, but not altogether surprising news. I knew we were running out of time, and most legislation doesn't get passed the first time it comes up. So this was still a massive win. But just in general, like I have been feeling kind of frustrated, and, I might just be a little overworked, to be honest. Like it's been a whirlwind year. We moved across the country. I've been working as much as humanly possible because Dustin's primary contract, he also works freelance, wasn't renewed. Not anything he did, just issues with the company and their finances. And that put pressure on me to take on even more work. It took him a really long time to find some other contracts. It's like a weird world out there right now, right? So I alone have just been like full throttle working all the time. Honestly, the week leading up to the live episode was so much for me. Just like not a lot of sleep, but a whole lot of work all day, every day, that the day after the episode, I literally woke up like vomiting because I had such a bad migraine. Like my body was just like, nope. And so I have had that feeling of like, wow, there's just so much going on and I'm tired. But it's also just like clothes horse is a lot of work. And sometimes it's reading mean emails from people you don't know very well or at all, or dealing with people on the internet who are just being difficult, or just immersing yourself in a lot of really depressing news and research because, I'm a conduit of that information for so many of you. So it's just sort of hard sometimes, right? Also like Jamboree ticket sales have been really slow. It's really stressing me out. People have been ghosting me for meetings that they set up to be potential guests on the show. Now, like one of them had a good reason, but the other ones were like, oh, I just got busy. I'm like, what? All of that has been making me feel like I'm just bad at this. Like I make a crappy podcast that no one likes, no one respects me, and I'm just a ding dong who is, as a dude on TikTok told me, making shitty sustainability memes. It can be hard to see the impact of one's work when you're facing, the behemoth that is fast fashion, right? And you feel like, a lot of times you're doing it by yourself. It is hard. It's just like hard to keep things in perspective. And it's even more difficult. I'm sure this is something you can relate to as someone who also cares about this a lot. Many of us have so many different jobs in our day-to-day lives. There are the jobs that pay the bills, or at least somewhat pay the bills. There's the housework. There's caring for children or other loved ones. The emotional labor of running a household and a family and being a mother or a sister or a friend, right? Then we have this job of slow fashion, right? It's hard and it's a lot and it's normal to feel tired. And I'm telling you all this because I have had to give myself that pep talk that being tired doesn't mean I'm a failure. But I also recognize when I'm tired how my brain will just start spiraling and being so critical and doomy, right? Like if you agree, or unlike if you agree, I guess. I don't know. Anyway. And then the Fashion Act didn't get passed, which once again, like I kind of had a feeling it wasn't going to because we were trying so hard in that last week. And if we had just had one more week, I think it would have. It was really down to the wire. Anyway, I'm telling you all of this because if you're feeling tired or frustrated with the work you're doing to make the world a better place, well, know that it is normal to feel tired and frustrated. And I feel it too. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I had a weird conversation that I think I was viewing through a particularly dismal lens because I was tired and stressed out, where I thought a friend was trying to tell me to stop making clothes horse because it just wasn't that good and it wasn't financially sustainable. And I kind of was like, okay, I guess I'm going to stop. Like no one wanted to tell me, but now someone told me. And then I was like, okay, well, I can't just stop right now. I have like episodes lined up and, the Fashion Act and all this other stuff. And I decided, okay, well, I'll just do it for the rest of the year and then I'll reassess. And maybe I can do a better job of this and people will notice and there will be impact. But the Fashion Act not passing and moving into next year and requiring more work from all of us involved, that reminded me that this fight, this movement to dismantle slow fashion, to protect our planet and its people, it's still in the early stages, even if it feels like we've been doing it for a long time already. It's like taking your laundry out of the washing machine halfway through the wash part of the cycle and calling it done and being disappointed. My friends, that laundry is still full of soap. It's dripping wet. It needs to be rinsed and it needs to be spun and dried. The laundry has just begun. And so has this fight against fast fashion. So I am going to keep doing this as long as I can, or until everybody stops listening. Maybe I'll get better at it. And no, I'm not looking for feedback or advice, so please don't send it. I get plenty of that via email every day. I will say that I already feel when I take a step back, when I stop being so hard on myself, when I give myself a break and that luxury, that time of just, not working, I can see that I have grown so much over the last few years as a speaker and a researcher, a thinker, a writer, a person who has to deal with difficult people on the internet. I have grown and changed, and so have you. And we, all of us, we have made a difference. Even if it's hard to see. In fact, we're all getting better at doing everything we do, even if it's hard for us to see it, even if it's hard for us to let ourselves see it. But if we give ourselves that treat of looking back at assessing where we were then and where we are now, we've all made some major progress. And we'll keep doing that, even if it's just teeny tiny steps forward sometimes that we can't see at the time, because when we look back, those steps, they turn into leaps. We've already made so much change, and we're going to continue to do this together. Yes, the Fashion Act didn't pass, but it showed that people want it, that legislators are starting to wise up to that. In our early conversations, a lot of the legislative staff was kind of like, it's just clothes. Who cares? You guys are being overdramatic, right? But over time, with the persistence of the coalition, having these conversations over and over again, they began to see that, oh wow, it's not just clothes, it's the planet, it's climate change, it's plastic pollution, it's a human rights issue. So all of us will keep doing what we're doing. All of us working on the Fashion Act, and you and me and everyone involved in the slow fashion community. And we'll get this legislation passed in more and more states. Maxine, who you all met in the Fashion Act episode, wrote a statement that she shared on LinkedIn, and I'm going to share that in the show notes. You should go give it a read. According to LinkedIn, I don't know how they time this. It's a 3-minute read. I think you can read it faster. She said in her statement, quote, "While disappointed, we remain steadfast. Numerous other states continued to reach out for the language of the bill, and we 100% intend to be back in the New York legislature when the next session opens. Our kids and conscience demand nothing less. You can choose to be a part of this future with us or move even further from an authentic, sustainable future." Yes, she's right.
Founded by third-generation designer Emily Lemandry, MLE is a sustainable accessories brand for the modern gentlewoman. The majority of MLE pieces are made to order in the Catskills by a team of skilled craftswomen in an effort to manufacture as sustainably as possible using remnant, upcycled, and eco-friendly materials. Standout pieces include the Gentlewoman's Agreement collection, featuring a magnetic hand-shaped clasp and inspired by women working together. MLE also makes statement hair clips from eco-friendly cellulose acetate and handbags from fabric sustainably sourced from New York's Garment District. You can find us at madebymle.com. That's made by letter M, letter L, letter E.com, or on Instagram at madebymle. Use code CLOTHESHORSE for 10% off your first order.
Every conversation we had while working on the Fashion Act, whether it was with one another or with legislative staff, included Shein. And one thing that kind of blew my mind, or at least reinforced how niche the topic as slow fashion still is. We have so much work to do. Many of the people we met at the New York State Capitol had no idea what SHEIN was. Some had heard it in passing, but most had never heard of it at all. So yeah, we have to talk about SHEIN. We have to talk about it a lot with a lot of people because we take this information for granted. Most people don't know it. We really have our work cut out for us. But I think after this series, you're going to feel confident talking to other people about SHEIN. And you're going to know why you need to talk to them about SHEIN. Before we proceed, it's time for the SHEIN disclaimer here. SHEIN's growth is a bad thing for everyone on this planet. And don't worry, you will understand that completely by the end of this series. We are not picking on SHEIN when we talk about the ethical and environmental issues related to its business model. We are aware, and by the way, when I say we, I mean the royal we. It's not just me and Brenda. We are all aware that the fashion industry as a whole has many ethical and environmental issues. So we aren't ignoring those by talking about SHEIN. You know, I have no love for any of those fast fashion companies. And to be honest, there are some that I kind of hate on a personal level. But SHEIN is specifically of importance and worthy of extensive conversation because its massive growth has changed and is changing how clothing is made and sold in this world. It's changing what we get when we buy clothing, and it's changing what it means to be a worker globally. And it's all very, very bad. The environmental implications are real. In 2020, SHEIN's use of virgin polyester, which BTW is made from oil, churned out the same amount of carbon dioxide as about 180 coal-fired power plants. That's according to the Changing Markets Foundation report, Synthetics Anonymous 2.0, Fashion's Persistent Plastic Problem, a personal favorite read of mine. Will be shared in the show notes. I go back to this one all the time. Now, that data point is from 2022, and I can only assume that the carbon dioxide emissions from SHEIN's polyester clothing production has only tripled at this point as its sales have grown. This is some scary shit, okay? We have to talk about SHEIN. Next, we are not being xenophobic when we talk about SHEIN. This has nothing to do with SHEIN being based in China or any other country. It could be a US-based company, and I would have the same concerns. It's not the country, it's the business model, okay? Furthermore, when we talk about SHEIN, we are not shaming people for shopping from SHEIN. I'm going to tell you, there are many reasons people shop from SHEIN: affordability, ease of shopping and access, size availability, even aesthetic. But these people, they don't love slave labor. They don't think it's hilarious that the world is burning thanks to all of that polyester. I'm sure they themselves are unhappy with the stuff they're being sold to because I know that. I see so much SHEIN stuff at the thrift stores, often with the original tags still attached. And when I try this stuff on, because by the way, I would buy a secondhand SHEIN item if I knew I would wear it a lot. Every time I try on one of these items, there are always major fit and sewing issues, major quality issues that make me know that the original buyer never got to wear it once because it was so defective. SHEIN isn't doing a great job of serving the people who shop from them, but somehow, and this is unfortunately true, it's doing a better job than most of the fashion industry is right now, especially when it comes to extended sizing. As I try to remind everyone as often as possible, everything is complicated, especially when humans are involved. There is rarely a black and white, simple answer. We could say to people who buy things from SHEIN, stop buying stuff from SHEIN, and that's probably not going to work. Because if they can't find clothes in their size that they can afford, well, they're going to go back to SHEIN. And not only are they going to go back to SHEIN, they are completely dipping out of any conversations about slow fashion or criticism of SHEIN because it makes them feel terrible or judged. What we can do is talk about Shein in straightforward, not judgmental, non-shamey terms, and let people make their own decisions to move away from Shein. And of course, buy less new clothing in general. We also can't throw alternatives to them as if they are easy fixes. And beware of this, okay? Because I see this happening a lot, even in the comments section of Clothes Horse posts, and I don't like it. Once again, this stuff is complicated. There's a lot of nuance. Lots of people don't have time to thrift, or maybe they don't have access to thrift stores, which can mean time. If you have a lot of small children or even one small child, I don't know why I said a lot, but even one small child can make thrifting nearly impossible. If you don't have a car, how are you going to get to thrift stores? Because they're further and further outside the city now. Furthermore, a lot of people can't find their sizes in thrift stores in things they want to wear, okay? There might be some stuff there, but do they want it? That's a good question, right? Do you have to wear clothes that you don't like? Well, I mean, you might have to work or when you hang out with your family or whatever. But in general, do you think that people should have to wear clothes they don't like? No, everyone should feel good, right? Everybody should feel like their best selves in their clothing. Furthermore, lots of people don't have time to, sew their own clothing, including me. If I were going to do that, that would mean I would basically have to give up Clothes Horse. And even still, I don't know if I would have enough time because I work a lot. And I know a lot of people who work a lot and have many other responsibilities. So telling people to sew their own clothing is not an easy fix either. To be honest, skipping Shein in 2024 has a lot of privilege attached to it. I have never shopped from Shein ever, not even once years ago or something. Yet you'll never see me announcing that on social media. Why? Well, what does it really mean? Who does that help? It's not a flex. I'm a straight-sized person who already owns a lot of clothing, and I can find new clothing in my size just about anywhere. I have a job working for myself where I can wear whatever I want. My ability to skip Shein only shows how easy it has been for me to find clothing elsewhere. It's not an indicator of moral superiority. I haven't accomplished anything major by not buying stuff from Shein. And overall, we could all work harder to be kinder and better listeners everywhere, especially on social media, where I literally see people being horrible to one another every day. I was talking about this with Dylan last week where I was like, I think I might need to take a break because sometimes social media makes me lose my faith in humanity. And that's really, really bad. And it's not even always people being really trolly. It's just people being not nice or judgy to one another. And I just don't like it. But even a statement as simple as I've never bought anything from Shein sounds like an announcement of judgment and blame and superiority. And that's just not how community building works. So when we talk about Shein, we accept that for some people, maybe many people, it's the best option for them right now. That doesn't mean we can't want better for them and our world, right? And Shein shouldn't be anyone's best option. That just shows how messed up everything is right now, that Shein would be the best place for you to buy clothes. And I believe it. For many people, it literally is right now. That's an indicator of so many other broken systems within our world. We're talking about Shein because its success is pushing the fashion industry to make clothing a lot faster and more quasi-disposable. It is making the problem of fast fashion much, much worse. And as the rest of the fashion industry tries to keep up with Shein, customers, workers, and our planet will suffer the consequences. So yeah, we have to talk about Shein, and there's a lot to say. Since last year, there's been a lot of conversation in the worlds of fashion, finance, and business as a whole about Shein's planned IPO. Now, you're like, Amanda, I've heard IPO thrown around. What does that mean? Maybe you don't spend as much time listening to Marketplace as I do, and I get it. So let's take a minute to explain what an IPO is. Well, first things first, IPO stands for Initial Public Offering, and it means that shares in a company are being made available to the public for buying and trading for the first time ever. Before launching an IPO, a company is privately owned. After the IPO, that company will be publicly traded. If it's still privately owned, it may have received investment money from private equity or angel investors, but it is largely owned and controlled by its original founder. So Shein is a billion-dollar company, but it is still owned by entrepreneur and search engine optimization marketing specialist Chris Zhu. This private ownership allows Shein to operate largely under a shroud of secrecy. Like, even people reporting on this potential IPO don't even know exactly how much revenue the company is driving every year, but they think it will be around $50 billion this year. And by the way, if we pretended, which I don't think this is true, that the average retail price of like everything that Shein sold is $20, which I actually think it's much lower, we would still be looking at more than 2 billion garments sold from one company. If Shein becomes a publicly traded company, data like revenue, expenses, and profit will become public knowledge. Furthermore, becoming a publicly traded company, meaning shares will be bought and sold on an exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange, and stock prices will move up and down regularly. It's also expensive. Publicly traded companies have a lot more overhead expenses for accounting, legal support, and the more complex, rigid reporting requirements. This also means that the original owners and investors will lose some of their control of the company, now being forced to negotiate with a board and please shareholders. So it would be a big change for Shein. Why would a company opt to be publicly traded? Especially one like Shein that is maybe going to make $50 billion in sales this year already, one that has already made a billionaire out of its founder. Because going public means just like an epic level of investment capital coming in all at once, rather than bit by bit from an assortment of private investors. And this can guarantee fast, exponential growth. So while Shein is already massive, this will allow it to basically dominate the apparel industry around the world once and for all, and expand into other categories beyond clothing and accessories. So this is a big deal. Now, an IPO is a complex process, and it requires a lot of steps to get there, including approval from government regulators. Here in the US, that's the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Last year, and for a chunk of this year, Shein was trying to launch its IPO here in the US on the New York Stock Exchange. It filed for its US IPO in late November last year, and really, as of like this month, it's kind of ultimately derailed for a few key reasons. For one, the SEC is currently very, let's say, skeptical of Chinese companies planning an IPO here in the US, as the SEC feels that these companies do not offer enough transparency into the risk factors within their businesses. Now, this skepticism is partially driven by a not great relationship between the US and China. But also, Shein has a lot of risk factors that could mean that investors could not only lose all of their money, but also be complicit in supporting some very bad things around the world. First, there's the issue of Shein's supply chain. Shein has been found in the past to use cotton from the Xinjiang region of China, where the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims has been used to pick cotton. And furthermore, Shein is super secretive about its supply chain in general. China's forced labor problems extend beyond Xinjiang cotton to the synthetic fabric mills and product production facilities, aka factories, all around the country. And furthermore, Shein has been caught time and time again in investigations that uncovered horrible working conditions and wage theft and extremely low wages within its factories. So right there, major risk factor. Next, Shein's environmental impact is also a major risk factor. Here is a company that produces more pollution than the entire country of Paraguay. And by the way, okay, so someone said that on, I don't know, like Instagram the other day, like it was a post. And people were in the comments sort of like, who cares? Paraguay is a really small country. Well, I'm sure the 6.7 million people who live in Paraguay would be thrilled to hear that you think that it's a really unimportant small country. But one company producing more pollution than an entire country of 6.7 million people. I mean, come on. I was busy and I was tired and grouchy. It was good that I was busy because I was so tired and grouchy because I was about to be like, do you even know 6.7 million people? Tell me how many people you know. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of carbon footprint. We're talking about one company being the equivalent of 6.7 million people. And by the way, that statistic about Shein having the same carbon and pollution output as an entire country, I want to be clear. That's just talking about the production of all the stuff Shein is selling. It's not talking about the shipping around the world. It's not talking about what's going to happen when all that stuff ends up in the trash. It's not even talking about the poly bags and the mailers and all the other stuff associated with selling billions of garments every year. It's just talking about the production of that stuff. So I'm sure if we really had a way to total that up, we would be able to compare it to a much larger country for all of you who are somehow very minimizing of Paraguay. Anyway, just a rant I had to have there for someone to hear so that I don't have to go type it all out on Instagram. Anyway, despite Shein's attempts at greenwashing and its claims of caring about sustainability, the 2024 report Clean Energy Close-Up by Stand Earth found that Shein increased its carbon emissions by over 50% in 1 year. I have no doubt that is because that is literally how much their sales have increased. And as I said earlier, just 2 years ago, their output was just huge, strictly when it came to producing all that polyester clothing. I have no doubt that has doubled or tripled and will continue to, especially if this IPO moves forward. Anyway, let's talk about that report, Clean Energy Close-Up, for a minute. So in a conversation with Sourcing Journal, Rachel Kitchen, who's the senior corporate climate campaigner at Stand.Earth, described the findings in this report as, quote, really disappointing and actually extremely frustrating and quite scary. The organization tracked and compared results to the previous year's fossil-free fashion scorecard, where it focused on 11 major fashion companies, including H&M, Puma, Nike, Levi's, Adidas, Gap, Inditex, aka Zara, Lululemon, Fast Retailing, which is Uniqlo, and Shein. A year later, only 3 of those companies, that's Levi's, Puma, and H&M, were on track to reducing manufacturing emissions by at least 55% by 2030. Now, this is all about manufacturing. And once again, I think we cannot understate the impact of shipping all these clothes all around the world. This doesn't really capture that. This is really just the creation of them. But these clothes are traveling all around the world. I mean, even Zara, we talked about how a lot of those clothes are flying from the factory to Spain, where they go to the distribution center. They're all sorted back out, and then they get back on a plane to go out to the stores. And this report doesn't even capture that. We're just talking about production here. Anyway, only 3 of them did better. But the average score, which basically everybody else failed, was 25 points out of 100. And these points came from areas of commitments, transparency, progress, and action/advocacy. Once again, 25% was the average. Shein, spoiler alert, lowest score. What do you think it was? If 25 was the average, what do you think Shein, the lowest, had? 2 2.5 points. Don't know how they got that half point, but yeah, 2.5. Really, really bad. And like I said, increased its carbon emissions by over 50% in 1 year. To give you some context there, because sometimes you hear a percentage like that and you're like, I don't know. Let's say you were very lucky and last year you were paid $100,000 for your job. If you got a 50% raise, as in, much like Shein's giving this 50% raise in its carbon emissions, this year you would be paid $150,000. Yeah, that's a big shift, right? And it's scary. In fact, Kitchen, she told the Sourcing Journal, the emissions growth from Shein alone almost completely wipes out the emissions reductions that we're seeing in other brands on the scorecard. That in itself is hugely alarming. The scale of growth from that company is incredible. And then contrast that with the complete lack of education and lack of transparency from the company when it comes to what they are actually going to do to reduce that impact. It's really scary. So yeah, Shein's environmental impact in a time where fucking finally governments are starting to care about this. Well, it's major, right? And this is a risk factor that investors are worried about because in theory, if all of our dreams come true, well, I have other dreams beyond this. One of them is going to the American Girl Cafe for my birthday. But if our dreams come true, governments are going to crack down on this stuff. And if you're an investor in Shein, you are going to lose a lot of money, right? Because Shein's business model, as we will touch on time and time again, only works if no one's regulating anything it does, basically. So this is a major risk factor for investors. Another one of Shein's risk factors, product safety, including toxic chemicals in Shein's clothing, shoes, and accessories. And guess what? With Shein's current Byzantine corporate structure, we'll get to that in a bit, it's kind of impossible to hold Shein legally responsible if you are injured. And that would include having a reaction to the chemicals in a garment or getting sick from it. But if Shein were to become a publicly traded company, well, they could face any number of lawsuits for this and many of its other bad business practices. And so that legal liability could just erase profits, right? As I just said a couple minutes ago, Shein's business model only works if it's just like completely unregulated and doesn't have to be responsible to anyone. And if people can now sue it and get money from Shein, that's a bad look for investors. They don't want to see that, right? And that's at this point with the way Shein is operating, that is a huge risk. We'll talk about this more later, but it's really, really hard to hold Shein legally liable for anything, and that works in their advantage. And that brings me to Shein's final risk factor, at least in the eyes of the SEC and investors alike. It just has so many lawsuits going on right now, and like big ones, like with big retailers like Uniqlo and Nike and H&M, all for copyright infringement. It's also facing multiple lawsuits here in the US from artists and designers for stolen designs and art. And Shein is also wrapped up in a legal battle with, of all companies, Temu right now. That one could cost them a lot of money. And these are all major risk factors for investors. It also doesn't help that the National Retail Federation has also rejected Shein's application to join. If you are not a nerd like me, I will just tell you the National Retail Federation, otherwise known as the NRF, is the retail industry's largest and most powerful trade association. Ordinarily, not being a member probably wouldn't be the biggest problem a brand has, but for Shein, who is trying very, very hard to make this IPO happen, a rejection from the NRF is not a good look. And it's not hard to see why the NRF would reject Shein. The brand's business practices, as well as an amazing customs loophole that we'll discuss later, these give Shein a huge and unfair advantage against every company that is a member of the National Retail Federation. We'll talk about these advantages so many times in this series. You almost, and I said almost, you don't actually start to feel bad for these other brands. I'm like, oh, sucks to be you, you know? So Shein not having success here in the US, it does not look like the IPO is going to happen here, which to me at first I was like, big relief. Well, Shein has shifted gears and now it's trying to file its IPO on the London Stock Exchange. And on one hand, some investors and politicians in the UK, they're excited about this prospect. With Shein's £50 billion valuation, it could be the biggest IPO in UK history. But it's also a tough sell to UK regulators for all of the same reasons it was in the United States. Florida Republican Marco Rubio, who we will probably never talk about again here, but we have a reason to talk about him right now. It's surprising. He actually wrote to UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. Hunt is the government's chief financial minister. He wrote him a letter saying, Shein previously sought to list in New York City, but failed due to concerns about its unethical and irresponsible business practices. At the time, I warned U.S. securities regulators about Shein's alleged exploitation of slave labor and trade loopholes. I now feel a duty of friendship to repeat these warnings and urge caution before the United Kingdom allows Shein to list in London. But beyond Marco Rubio or even the Clothes Horse podcast, even UK fund managers are not really on board with a Shein IPO in the UK. I'm kind of excited about this. I read a great Financial Times piece where some fund managers got down to brass tacks about their feelings about Shein, and it kind of loosely felt like reading the finance version of Us Weekly. One fund manager said, I don't think anyone with an environmental, social, and governance team will be able to buy it. It smacks of desperation for the London Stock Exchange. They'll take anything. Another one said, the notion that certain companies with particularly poor human rights practices and sustainability credentials could choose London as a listings destination will not help to make us more competitive in the long run. And I am regretting so much right now that I don't know how to do a British accent, because it would have been great to hear those in a British accent, right? Anyway, in general, the sentiment was kind of like, allowing Shein to do an IPO here is a very bad look. And to be honest, it feels really promising that even the finance world is like, this ultra fast fashion stuff, it might be a problem. To me, this is a big step forward. And to be clear, many fast fashion brands are publicly traded, from Zara to Nike to Urban Outfitters. And honestly, they've all had a lot of issues with their stock prices over the last few years. But all of these companies went public far before we were talking about slave labor being used to make clothing and the endless churn of new cheap clothes becoming an environmental crisis. It makes me wonder, if Nike decided to go public this year, could they? I don't know. And so to me, this is a good sign. One last thing regarding Shein's IPO, because this is not a finance podcast and I hope you haven't fallen asleep with boredom. According to data from London-based research firm Edited, Shein has been increasing its average prices pretty substantially this year versus last year as of June 1st, when they compared prices on June 1st this year to June 1st last year. They found some really significant price changes. In fact, these price increases are outpacing any other price increases from the other fast fashion retailers, all of them. In the US, which is, by the way, Shein's biggest market in terms of sales, 28% of Shein's total sales come from US customers. Anyway, in the US, Shein raised the average price for a women's dress by 28% this year, increasing from about $20-ish to $28.51. Shein's UK prices increased by about 15%, and the prices it offered in European countries increased by 36%. Now, why are they doing this? Well, some retail analysts believe that Shein increased its prices to show future investors that it can sell items at a higher price point. It may also be trying to drive even more sales volume to increase its valuation. So if you sell the same amount of stuff, but you make 28% more off of each sale, well, your valuation could increase. It could also be preparing for the much higher internal expenses associated with running a publicly traded company. It's one of the many, many reasons Shein can offer such unnaturally low prices. It's because it isn't burdened with the accounting, reporting, and legal expenses of its other fast fashion competitors. What will happen next with this IPO? It's really hard to say. I'm going to be watching it really closely. Obviously, I get a great amount of joy every time it seems to fall apart or get pushed out, but you'll be the first to know when it moves forward somewhere, if it does move forward somewhere. Let's take a moment to thank some of the incredible small businesses who keep Clotheshorse going via their generous Patreon support. Selena Sanders, a social impact brand that specializes in upcycle clothing using only reclaimed, vintage, or thrifted materials, from tea towels, linens, blankets, and quilts. Sustainably crafted in Los Angeles, each piece is designed to last in one's closet for generations to come. Maximum style, minimal carbon footprint. Shift Clothing out of beautiful Astoria, Oregon, with a focus on natural fibers, simple hardworking designs, and putting fat people first. Discover more at shiftwheeler.com. Late to the party, creating one-of-a-kind statement clothing from vintage, salvaged, and thrifted textiles. They hope to tap into the dreamy memories we all hold. Floral curtains, a childhood dress, the wallpaper in your best friend's rec room, all while creating modern, sustainable garments that you'll love wearing and have for years to come. Late to the Party is passionate about celebrating and preserving textiles, the memories they hold, and the stories they have yet to tell. Check them out on Instagram at Late to the Party People. Vino Vintage, based just outside of LA. We love the hunt of shopping secondhand because you never know what you might find. Catch us at flea markets around Southern California by following us on Instagram at vino.vintage so you don't miss our next event. Dylan Page is an online clothing and lifestyle brand based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our products are chosen with intention for the conscious community. Everything we carry is animal-friendly, ethically made, sustainably sourced, and cruelty-free. Dylan Page is for those who never stop questioning where something comes from. We know that personal experience dictates what's sustainable for you, and we are here to help guide and support you to make choices that fit your needs. Check us out at dylanpage.com and find us on Instagram at dylanpagelife&style. Salt Hats, purveyors of truly sustainable hats, hand-blocked, sewn, and embellished in Detroit, Michigan. Find us on Instagram at Salt Hats. Gentle Vibes Vintage. We are purveyors of polyester and psychedelic relics. We encourage experimentation and play not only in your wardrobe, but in your home too. We have thousands of killer vintage pieces ready for their next adventure. See them all on Instagram at Gentle Vibes Vintage. Thumbprint is Detroit's only fair trade marketplace, located in the historic Eastern Market. Our small business specializes in products handmade by empowered women in South Africa, making a living wage, creating things they love like hand-painted candles and ceramics. We also carry a curated assortment of sustainable and natural locally made goods. Thumbprint is a great gift destination for both the special people in your life and for yourself. Browse our online store at thumbprintdetroit.com and find us on Instagram at thumbprintdetroit. Vagabond Vintage DTLV is a vintage clothing, accessories, and decor reselling business based in downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. Not only do we sell in Las Vegas, but we're also located throughout resale markets in San Francisco, as well as at a curated boutique called Lux and Ivy, located in Indianapolis, Indiana. Jessica, the founder and owner of Vagabond Vintage DTLV, recently opened the first IRL location located in the Arts District of downtown Las Vegas on August 5th. The shop has a strong emphasis on 60s and 70s garments, single-stitch tees, and dreamy loungewear. Follow them on Instagram at Vagabond Vintage DTLV and keep an eye out for their website coming fall of 2022. So how did Shein become this massive force that is, this is not hyperbole. It is changing the global apparel industry. And really the global, everything industry, because much as we have seen the fast fashion model adopted by companies that sell furniture or throw pillows or even food, every consumer goods company will be watching and imitating what Shein does within their own businesses, no matter what they sell. Last year, I did a whole series tracing the evolution or de-evolution, your choice, of fashion in a series called From 1.0 to 3.0, where I explained that the traditional fast fashion model was fast fashion 1.0. The sped-up version adopted by Fashion Nova and Boohoo was fast fashion 2.0. And Shein, Temu, Cider, etc., they were fast fashion 3.0. And not to be too full of myself here, but I recommend listening to that series if you haven't already to better understand how we got to Shein world domination, because it didn't happen overnight and it all played out basically in our lifetimes. Not even basically, for sure. And for many of us in our adult lifetimes, okay? It happened fast and slow all at once. So Shein was founded by Chris Zhu, as you might recall earlier. Apparently he is an SEO genius. Who knew? And he founded that back in October 2008 when it was called ZZKKO. And all it did was sell wedding dresses. But soon it rebranded as SHEIN-side, and it began selling more women's clothing and accessories. Back then, it primarily sold product from the wholesale clothing market in Guangzhou. So it wasn't really making stuff, designing stuff. It was just picking stuff, right? And I'm sorry I'm saying it. There was a staff of people certainly doing this. Shein is not some sentient creature who goes out there and picks product. But anyway, in 2012, it began to establish its own supply chain, asserting control over the types of product it was selling. And in 2014, it bought another Chinese online retailer, Romwe. And guess what? Romwe still exists, both in its own website and on Amazon and probably other marketplaces as well, just like Shein. But here it was really saying hey, we're going to become a clothing retailer. Now, through the late 2010s, Shein was kind of comedy fodder for blogs and social media accounts. Sort of I thought I was ordering this from Shein, and what I really got was this ... heinous, pale imitation of the photo. And that's because Shein was pretty blatantly stealing brand photography and creating copies of styles from photos, which is kind of like designing something via a game of telephone. Of course, the final product will be different than the original inspiration. It's funny, not funny, haha, but interesting that it seems, I searched so hard for an hour today. It feels impossible to find any of this older, hilarious Shein content anywhere online. And I have no doubt that the brand has pressured platforms to pull that content. But back then, Shein was copying stuff really blatantly, literally stealing photos from brand websites, putting them on their own website, and then selling copies of that stuff. And so people would order from Shein, but not a lot of them, and most people had a negative experience. But then around 2020, Shein began to get it together, investing money in better photography, influencer partnerships, and while it was still stealing designs right and left, still is, it wasn't literally stealing photos from other brand sites, unlike a lot of sellers on Temu and on Amazon. Recently, I've had multiple clients finding copied versions of their product for sale on Amazon, and they blatantly, these sellers, took the photos from their websites. I always report those when I see them or when someone sends them my way, but I don't know if that helps, but I like to think it does, I'm doing my part. Anyway, 2020. Do you remember it? Seems like a year people talk about a lot. If you read as many think pieces about the pandemic's impact on fashion at the height of the pandemic as I did, because, I was kind of bored, well, I'm sorry that you did, because most of them ended up being complete nonsense in hindsight. We were told that fashion was over and we were only wearing sweatpants from now on and forever. I know that there was at least one New York Times piece about that like 1,000 people sent me. We also were told that no one would ever prioritize style over function ever again. It was about comfort and utility. We were also told that fashion would finally slow down, fast fashion would be over, and we wouldn't see this steady stream of new stuff all the time. Lies. And we also were told that customers would buy less because, fashion was over. It was all utilitarian comfort wear for the rest of time. No one needs that much of it. We're over buying clothes. We've all moved on. We're evolved in some new way. We're probably buying lots of other things that we don't need. Yeah, that didn't happen either, except for the part where we're all still also buying lots of other stuff we don't need. I, at the time, did not believe any of that. And not just because I don't own sweatpants or that I, despite losing my job and never leaving the house, still got dressed up every day, including makeup. True story. Every day of 2020 and 2021 because it made my mental health a lot better. And I would love a show of hands here. I'm psychically picking this up as you raise your hand for anyone else who is doing this because it really did help. And, I work from home and I still do that every day. So here's the thing. The pandemic isn't over. And I also know that people aren't only wearing sweatpants or utilitarian unisex futuristic jumpsuits. We guess what? We kept buying clothes and lots of them. By now, you all know, if you've been listening for a while, that I lost my job at the beginning of the pandemic. And the last thing I had to do before being furloughed was cancel every single order we had placed, even if the product was already made and on the way to the warehouse. And I know I've told you this before, but I just have to say again, it was terrible. I still have nightmares about it. Sales reps cried and they lost their jobs. Vendors begged me to reconsider because this would mean bankruptcy for them. Brands went out of business. And the whole thing struck me as fundamentally immoral because my employer was just one small brand under a larger fast fashion parent company that owned several large brands. And all of those brands were canceling their orders too. And that company always bragged about having $100 million in the bank. Like this was supposed to be something that made us feel safe in our jobs. But all of a sudden we weren't mentioning that as we're canceling everything on order and driving people into bankruptcy. We were just canceling everything and ensuring that the people making those clothes would starve and lose their homes. It was disgusting. I hated it. It filled me with rage at the unfairness of this world. But I also knew at the time that I had no say in the matter. The thing is, every other retailer out there did the same thing. My friends who have businesses where they work on the wholesale side, maybe they have their own brand and they sell wholesale, they were stuck with all this product. They were stuck with debt. Some of them closed up. Some of them are finally getting things back on track. It's 2024 now. It was bad. But all of these retailers, let me just tell you, most short-sighted decision ever. We'll get into that. But they didn't want to be stuck with even more inventory that they could not sell because in their minds, they were sort of mitigating the damage of the pandemic. There was this expectation that we would be on lockdown for a long time. No one would buy anything. And these retailers were really looking at the bottom line, right? Of course, everyone was convinced that fashion was over, at least the New York Times was. And there was this feeling that people would never buy new outfits again. This is so silly because people are people and they are always going to want to wear something special. And yes, they will need new outfits. This was so ridiculous. But what happened as the result of all of these product cancellations was that none of those brands had anything to sell other than sweatpants. Seriously, even Nuuly, my now at this point former employer, started renting out sweatpants after I was furloughed. I was like, wow, I've really seen it all now. And it turned out that even though people were sitting at home feeling terrified, and even though lots of people lost their jobs and their sense of financial stability, Lots of other people were still working and had nowhere to spend their money now, but they couldn't travel or eat out. So, dun dun dun, time to do some online shopping. But there was nothing to buy from the brands that they usually shopped because they canceled everything. So Shein was like, hey, we're going to launch 6,000 new styles every day. We're going to use technology to ensure that we are offering product that aligns with every new micro trend and aesthetic that people are talking about on social media, especially this new app, TikTok. And guess what? People are on social media more hours than they've ever been because they're at home. And this is how they're staying connected and killing time. So we've got this captive audience to sell stuff. And even better, we're going to take that, we're going to leverage social media because we know we've got this captive audience, and we're going to get people to come to us to buy new clothes to cheer themselves up. Meanwhile, every other brand is just like, oh, here's some sweatpants. Hey, hang in there. Or here's a picture of a furry cow. They just blew it, really. So the thing is, lots of people were weirded out by Shein at first. After all, it's a weird name. It ships directly from China. How long will that take? Like, how long do I have to wait for this order? Is this safe? Can I put my credit card and number in here and it's okay? Why is everything so ludicrously cheap? Should I just not question it? I don't know. And then, maybe people had heard negative things about Shein in the past. The knockoffs, the disappointing orders, the inability to return everything. People were skeptical, but dang. They really wanted to buy something. They were bored, right? No one had anything to sell them that they knew, brands that they were comfortable with and used to. And here was Shein with hundreds of thousands of new styles on the site at any given moment. You could simply download the app and scroll all day. And even if you have misgivings at first, when you start seeing people posting their Shein hauls on Instagram or TikTok, suddenly you feel a lot less nervous about giving it a chance. And that's what happened. Lots of people, especially Americans, began to shop from Shein. And then Shein does $10 billion in sales in 2020. It becomes the largest online retailer of clothing in the world by October, while every other brand out there is on the verge of failure and still trying to sell us sweatpants. How was Shein just killing it when we were supposed to be wearing sweatpants for the rest of our lives? Once again, the retailers, aka every brand who canceled all of their orders, did the most foolish thing by doing that. So short-sighted, but if there is something that never ceases to amaze me about this industry, it is just how short-sighted they are. It's all about the next few months of stock prices, of the balance sheet, of the sales plan. It is never the long-term vision. And all of these brands thought that no one would ever buy clothes again, or at least not for a really long time. I mean, just so foolish. Not offering new stuff was a mistake because when your model involves getting people to shop from you as often as possible, well, they won't do that when you're not giving them a reason to come back. These brands basically opened the door for Shein. No, they actually gave them the keys to the house and said, stay as long as you want. Don't worry about paying the rent. And I do believe that if these brands had not canceled all of their orders and then spent the next 6 months slinging sweatpants, well, that's a tongue twister, Shein would not have gained a foothold as fast as it did. And I do wonder if we would be talking about it in the same way years later. I really believe that 2020, everything came together to let Shein just blow up. The thing is, not only did these brands and their very short-sighted business decisions set the stage for Shein, they also cannot compete with Shein on pricing or just about anything else. And we'll be talking about that more next week. But let's just get started with how it all works. If you're enjoying this episode, then this is a great time to remind you that my work here at Clotheshorse is made possible by the support of listeners like you, just like NPR, and these great small businesses. Please go give them your support. Blank Cass, or Blanket Coats by Cass, is focused on restoring, renewing, and reviving the history held within vintage and heirloom textiles. By embodying the love, craft, and energy that is original to each vintage textile as I transfer it into a new garment, I hope we can reteach ourselves to care for and mend what we have and make it last. Blank Cass lives on Instagram at _Cass, and a website will be launched soon at blankcass.com. Located in Whistler, Canada, Velvet Underground is a velvet jungle full of vintage and secondhand clothing, plants, a vegan cafe, and lots of rad products from other small sustainable businesses. Our mission is to create a brand and community dedicated to promoting self-expression, as well as educating and inspiring a more sustainable and conscious lifestyle, both for the people and the planet. Find us on Instagram at shop_Velvet Underground or online at www.shopvelvetunderground.com. St. Evens is a New York City-based vintage shop that is dedicated to bringing you those special pieces you'll reach for again and again. More than just a store, St. Evens is dedicated to sharing the stories and history behind the garments. 10% of all sales are donated to a different charitable organization each month. New vintage is released every Thursday at wearstevens.com with previews of new pieces and more brought to you on Instagram at wear_st.evens. That's Wear St. Evens. Country Feedback is a mom and pop record shop in Tarboro, North Carolina. They specialize in used rock, country, and soul and offer affordable vintage clothing and housewares. Do you have used records you want to sell? Country Feedback wants to buy them. Find us on Instagram at Country Feedback Vintage and Vinyl, or head down east and visit our brick and mortar. All are welcome at this inclusive and family-friendly record shop in the country. Republica Unicornia Yarns, handmade yarn and notions for the color obsessed, made with love and some swearing in fabulous Atlanta, Georgia by head yarn wench Kathleen. Get ready for rainbows with a side of giving a damn. Republica Unicornia is all about making your own magic using small batch, responsibly sourced, hand-dyed yarns and thoughtfully made notions. Slow fashion all the way down and discover the joy of creating your very own beautiful hand-knit, crocheted, or woven pieces. Find us on Instagram at Republica_Unicornia_yarns and at www.republicaunicornia.com. Picnic Wear, a slow fashion brand ethically made by hand from vintage and dead stock materials, most notably vintage towels. Founder Danny has worked in the industry as a fashion designer for over 10 years, but started Picnic Wear in response to her dissatisfaction with the industry's shortcomings. Picnic Wear recently moved to rural North Carolina, where all their sewing and accessories are now designed and cut, but the majority of their sewing is done by skilled garment workers in New York City. Their customers take comfort in knowing that all their sewists are paid well above New York City minimum wage. Picnic Wear offers minimal waste and maximum authenticity. Future vintage over future garbage. Cute Little Ruin is an online shop dedicated to providing quality vintage and secondhand clothing, vinyl, and home items in a wide range of styles and price points. If it's ethical and legal, we try to find a home for it. Vintage style with progressive values. Find us on Instagram at Cute Little Ruin. Is there a little bit of Italy in your soul? Are you an enthusiast of pre-loved decor and accessories? Bring vintage Italian style and history into your space with the Pewter Thimble. We source useful and beautiful things and mend them where needed. We also find gorgeous illustrations and make them print-worthy. Tarot cards, tea towels, and hand-picked treasures available to you from the comfort of your own home. Responsibly sourced from across Rome, lovingly renewed by fairly paid artists and artisans, with something for every budget. Discover more at thepewterthimble.com. Deco Denim is a startup based out of San Francisco, and it sells clothing and accessories that are sustainable, gender fluid, size inclusive, and high quality, made to last for years to come. Deco Denim is trying to change the way you think about buying clothes. Founder Sarah Mattis wants to empower people to ask important questions like, where was this made? Was this garment made ethically? Is this fabric made of plastic? Can this garment be upcycled? And if not, can it be recycled? Sign up at decodenim.com to receive $20 off your first purchase. They promise not to spam you and send out no more than 3 emails a month, with 2 of them surrounding education or a personal note from the founder. Again, that's decodenim.com. We know by now that fast fashion is faster than any version of fashion and retail that came before it. Before fast fashion, which, by the way, should we start calling that BFF before fast fashion? I don't know. Anyway, think about it. Before that, brands needed about 3 to 6 months to take a product from concept to in the stores for customers to buy. And something that only took 3 months would have been like, this is a fast track, we're rushing this through, or it's a really easy product development. It would not have been the standard. Fast fashion turned that up a notch, moving so fast the product could start as a concept and be in stores or on the website within the next 6 to 8 weeks. All of that product shipped overseas from the factories, often via airplane, where it was trucked from the airport to the brand warehouse. From there, it was shipped off to stores or customers. I don't know why I'm using the past tense here. Apologies, because this is still happening this way, whether it's Anthropologie or Zara or American Eagle, even Target. I think that my brain, we've already moved into the Shein era, and we're just looking back wistfully at when things were, quote, slower. Well, in the late 2010s and even like 2020, 2021, brands like Fashion Nova and Boohoo were able to speed up this process by manufacturing locally, often under, to be honest, shady, exploitative conditions. But the product still shipped to the warehouse in one big shipment where it was stored until it shipped off to the customer. And furthermore, after being caught engaging in all kinds of wage theft and human exploitation in both the US, that's Fashion Nova, and the UK, that's Boohoo, both companies began to shift their production overseas, falling more into the standard fast fashion turnaround time. And you can learn more about that whole episode, saga, if you will, in my series of episodes about the transition from fast fashion to ultra fast fashion. Once again, I'll share those in the show notes. The path, whether you were Boohoo or Fashion Nova or Target or Anthropologie, was always and remains, no matter how fast it was, factory, then airplane, then truck, then warehouse, then store or customer. But guess what? That's expensive. You have to build warehouses. You need staffing for the warehouse. You pay customs and duties on all of those big cargo shipments. You pay to have the shipments trucked to your warehouse. You've paid to ship into the country, and now you pay to ship it to the stores or customers. And all the way, you're paying people to handle this product. Well, Shein cuts that process down to factory, airplane, customer. There is no warehouse. There is no big cargo cost. There are no customs and duties. There are very few people to pay along the way. Shein and all of its copycat/peers ship directly from the factory to the customer. This model is already profitable by cutting out those middle steps, but there is another part of it that makes it so much more profitable, and that is not paying customs and duties. And shopping factory direct from China isn't exactly new. All of us in the Lolita community have been doing it for years, but it was also very difficult. Shein made it seamless, including free shipping. And it's super profitable because they get to ship everything duty-free. That's thanks to the de minimis rule, which allows any package shipping into the United States with a value under $800, which is a lot, to be exempt from duties and customs inspection. Now, that $800 threshold is kind of newish because until 2016, that threshold was $200. Raising it 400% opened the door for Shein and its peers, like Temu and Cider, to very profitably ship into the United States. This means that basically no order that any of those companies ship into the United States will ever be subject to duties because not only, let's be honest, if you place an order for more than $800 from Shein, it is massive. I can't even imagine how big that haul is. Based on the average price of a dress, it would be like 40 dresses. I mean, that's huge. It seems pretty unlikely, right? Not that it couldn't happen, but here's what makes it even easier for Shein to slide these products into the country without paying duties. Because they ship factory direct, every part of your order is going to ship from a different factory. And so even if you did go ahead and buy 40 dresses from Shein in one foul swoop, the value somehow being more than $800, you might just receive 40 different packages, and they're all under that de minimis threshold. In 2016, the de minimis rule applied to about 220 million packages making their way into the US directly to consumers. By 2021, it was 771 million, with 60% of those packages coming from China. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, last year, the U.S. processed more than 1 billion de minimis shipments worth more than $50 billion, and it didn't collect a cent of duty on any of those. And it's continuing to grow. By the end of January, the first month of this year, 500 million de minimis packages had already entered the United States. So any regular fast fashion brand or any other company shipping stuff into the US might be selling less units or doing less sales than Shein, but they are paying duties on everything they import. And that's because rather than shipping one parcel at a time, like Shein, they are importing their products in one big cargo shipment. And when the shipment arrives in the port, whether that's via airplane or boat, the shipment is inspected by customs and duties are charged. And yes, these duties can add up. They vary based on fabric, point of origin, other materials involved, and even product category. And they definitely impact the prices we pay for things here in the US. Some items like sneakers, I specifically remember developing some sneakers way early in my career, and the duty on those was 35% of the value, plus I want to say like another $11. It was wild. And yeah, we as customers, we pay for those duties, right? They're absorbed into the whole cost of goods, and the whole retail price is based on that, right? So we pay those duties ultimately. Synthetic fabrics like polyester, which Shein uses a lot of, have a higher duty rate. And so they get to slide those into the country too without paying any duty on them, while any other retailer would be paying a lot more for that product. So Shein is saving a ton of money thanks to the de minimis loophole. Meanwhile, it allows Shein to offer prices that no US brand ever could, thanks to not having to cover the price of duties. How much money are we talking about here? Well, I found this little nugget on a law review blog. Once again, this is linked in the show notes. You can go check it out. I got to read this quote to you. According to the companies themselves, Shein and Temu paid a grand total of $0 in import taxes, also known as duties, in 2022. For reference, during the same year, Gap paid $700 million in import duty, while H&M paid $205 million. We're not talking about a few cents here. So of course, the regular fast fashion brands cannot compete in terms of pricing, right? They got to cover that $700 million in duties, $205 million in duties. But they sure are trying. They also offset the expenses of all those duties by cutting staff in stores and warehouses and corporate offices, of suppressing wages, of reducing employee benefits, and negotiating for lower shipping rates with UPS, USPS, and FedEx, which leads those companies to cut staff, suppress wages, and reduce employee benefits. It's pretty cool, right? It has a total trickle effect. It reaches all of us. And also, if you've gone to a store recently and you can literally not find anyone to help you, or the shelves seem really empty, or the store seems really messy, this is why, right? Because these companies need to try to compete with Shein on pricing. They can't for many reasons, including all of these duties. And so how do they offset it? By cutting payroll. This year, labor unions, U.S. manufacturers, and trade groups have formed a bipartisan coalition working to get rid of the de minimis loophole. In March, Kim Glass, president and CEO of the National Council of Trade Organizations, told reporters, "Our industry has lost astonishingly 10 plants in 5 months as a result of the de minimis loophole. De minimis is not just a textile issue. De minimis is a wildfire out of control, killing our manufacturing sector and jobs, destroying local communities, and facilitating illegal, illicit, and dangerous products into the U.S." And it's true. If we ever want a more sustainable, ethical retail and fashion industry, Shein and Temu, etc., they need to stop having this unfair advantage. Because the problem is that customers are getting addicted to the unnaturally low prices that these brands offer. And Shein, which doesn't have to pay for warehouses, customs, or really much of anything, ensures that Shein and its competitors can offer prices that no one else can compete with. This might seem like a good story, like Shein is making fashion more affordable for people. What a hero. But it's way more complicated than that, right? And that means that any other company that wants to stay in business has to somehow figure out how to offer those prices too, while still paying duties and warehouses and all that other stuff. And it is the workers and customers who will suffer the repercussions of these low prices. Furthermore, the de minimis loophole means that none of these packages are being inspected, which means they could contain knockoffs, dangerous products, or items made with slave labor. In fact, Shein has such little visibility into its supply chain that despite claiming that there is no forced labor within its supply chain, a report issued last June by the U.S. House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party indicates that there is probably a lot of forced labor happening in the factories making its products. I'm primarily referring to the forced labor of the Uyghur Muslims, but political dissidents and other religious groups, like Tibetan Buddhists, have also been forced into work camps. The de minimis rule actually makes it easier for Shein to ship product made with forced labor into the United States. The sheer volume of packages ensures that customs agents will never be able to inspect them, or even a few of them. And in general, de minimis packages kind of fly through the system without any stop to check them. So the UFLPA is the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and it was passed in 2021, yay, to prevent products manufactured using the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims from shipping into the United States. And there is concern that Shein, Temu, and their peers are using this de minimis loophole to skirt compliance with the UFLPA. Okay, if you really want to get riled up, because you're not there yet, I recommend reading a Forbes article from the last month called "You're Buying So Much from Temu and Shein, the Air Cargo Industry Can't Keep Up." According to the article, and this isn't the thing that's going to rile you up most, by the way, no siree, we're coming to it in a few, just hold on to your britches. Temu and Shein ship the equivalent of 88 Boeing 777 freighters of cargo worldwide every day. That's 9,000 tons of cargo every single day. All in teeny tiny little packages that will never be inspected or anything, right? Temu and Shein alone, that's how much they're shipping. And Shein and Temu's demand for air freight has driven up the pricing for air freight across the board. So even the regular fast fashion brands who already ship via air, they're paying that upcharge and passing that cost onto customers, or more likely, because it is a dangerous proposition to increase prices on a customer in a Shein world, more likely they're just cutting the quality of the stuff they are selling in order to make the math. We know that story very well by now. Swapping into cheaper fabrics and trims, cutting corners, You know how it goes. And here is one way we see Shein already having this larger halo effect on the industry by making it harder to compete by doing anything other than making crappier clothes. But even worse, okay, now we're getting to the part that really gets me upset. All of those planes that were full of cargo coming from China to the US, they fly back to China right away after they're unloaded because, there's a ton more stuff to ship to the US the next day. And they fly back to China empty. From the Forbes piece, air freight's high costs come in part from largely empty planes that must make the return trip back from the US to China. You get a full plane to the US and a deadhead on the way back. Deadhead is an aviation industry term for a near empty or fully empty plane. Yeah, so just, empty airplanes flying back across the ocean to bring us more packages from Temu and Shein. And I want you, because man, we're all good at self-flagellating, right? Of making others feel bad on the internet too. I want you, the next time you feel bad about going on vacation or visiting your family and, taking a flight to do so, I want you to remember this because I can assure you that you taking an occasional airplane ride somewhere is nothing compared to the frequent flyer miles Shein and Temu are racking up every day. And if we could get this industry under control, you wouldn't have to feel bad about taking a flight sometimes. You shouldn't feel bad anyway. We only get to live one life. Anyway, now that you are fully riled up, I can feel that I am. Actually, I think my heart is pounding. That thing with the airplanes really, really upsets me. This is where we're going to leave this installment of the series. And I'll be back next week with part 2, where we will talk about Shein's Byzantine corporate structure, which, by the way, is another issue with the IPO. We're going to talk about Shein's safety issues, and we're going to talk about so many knockoffs and lawsuits. In the meantime, I want you to remember this. Well, one, I've spent 2 weeks having the theme song from the 80s sitcom Mama's Family stuck in my head on a nonstop loop. No wonder I'm tired. That's not the important thing, though. All of us, no matter where we live and how often we've watched Mama's Family, or what we wear, or what we do for a living, we are already experiencing the repercussions of fast fashion. And that's microplastics in the water, in the soil, in the food supply. That's water scarcity. That's the impact of carbon emissions. Once again, empty airplanes flying across the Pacific Ocean. I just can't, right? We were experiencing the suppression of wages, of going into stores and literally no one working in there. And whoever is working there is so stressed out and underpaid. And we are even experiencing what I call the emotionally corrosive nature of a steady stream of low quality, poor fitting clothing. And yes, it makes us feel bad. If you are upset about everything I've talked about today, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. What I can tell you is that this all will get worse as Shein becomes the standard for making and selling clothing. Everyone I know working in the environmental and workers' rights space is super freaked out about even more growth from Shein. We are stressed out too. But here's the thing. We, you, me, everyone we know, we have a stake in this and we have things we can do. And you know what we can do? Well, one is we can talk to other people about Shein. Once again, not with shame, not with blame, not with a gotcha kind of strategy, but rather just hey, do you know the crazy thing I learned about Shein today? They're flying empty airplanes across the ocean. Isn't that horrible? Just telling people the facts. Talking about Shein is step 1. And step 2 is, working together to get legislation passed, whether it is legislation to change the de minimis loophole, which would 100% change what's happening with Shein right now, or legislation like the Fashion Act, also a big game changer. And yes, it would apply to Shein. It can also mean even saying to our banks, right? If you invest in Shein, I'm taking all my money out of here. There are all these different things that we can do. I mean, notably is trying to avoid shopping from Shein also, but we have so much potential so much power here, and I don't want you to forget that, because it's easy. It's easy to feel as if, oh, how can I do anything here? And I promise that you can, because this whole community is going to be doing it together. Thanks for listening to another episode of Closed Source. Written, researched, edited, all the things by me, Amanda Lee McCarty. You know what I'm going to say? If you like it, leave a rating, a review, subscribe, tell your friends to listen to this episode about Shein. Seriously, especially if they shop from Shein, because they need to know. I think that they would be shocked. I think people are like, what's the problem with Shein? Here you go. We're getting to the problem with Shein. If you'd like to support my work financially, which of course I would love, you can learn more at patreon.com/closehorsepodcast. You can buy me a Ko-fi, which is just like a one-time, like you throw $5 my way. You can do that on my website, or you can find the link in my Instagram bio. You can subscribe to the Apple Premium subscription, where you'll get full access to the Closed Horse archives. Lastly, but never leastly, thank you to Dustin Travis White for our music and audio support, and I will see you all next week. Bye!